right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. This is session number 7 of our Morgoth's Ring discussion. Good to be back with you tonight. A lot of fun thinking about Morgoth's Ring this past week. I have to admit, I was a little surprised. So, as I know I've told you guys before, this is, our discussions here are the first time I've ever read the history of Middle-earth cover to cover to cover. I mean, I've never just sat down and plowed through the entire series before. Generally, I've used it in the past as a scholarly resource. I've looked stuff up, and there are parts, of course, that I've read, but a lot of parts, I didn't read through from cover to cover, or at least it's been a long time since I'd read them, many of them. In particular, this first half of Morgoth's Ring is one that I hadn't reviewed in a long time. And anyway, so this has all been really kind of fun to me. So here's the thing. As I mentioned last time, this has been kind of a slog in places, especially phase 1 of the Quenta, in some ways kind of going back over the same material again. And as we're noticing last week, and we're going to finish it up this week, that there's a lot of interesting tidbits there, and we've been tracing some interesting themes and everything and watching that go, but it's not been absolutely the most page-turning section of the entire histories of Middle-earth that we've ever talked about. It's just not. It's been many things, but it hasn't been that. So imagine my surprise. The first part, really, especially, of the phase 2 section really kind of blew me away, because of course the stuff on Elvish culture, right, is really cool, and that's of course a bit that I went right to and read before. But this section before that, the very opening of phase 2, which was the business about the Valaquenta, right? I probably must have read that at some point, but I'm not even 100% sure I ever did, because it's the fifth time through the, at least the fifth time through that material, and I hadn't ever been researching that material before, so I might have skipped it. I don't know, but holy cow, it was a more than a page turner. It was like a steamy tell-all. I mean, oh my goodness. I don't know if you guys had the same experience that I did. Just shocking revelation after shocking revelation. Oh, wow. So, yeah. I get, I'm looking forward to getting to the shocking bits where, of course, Christopher Tolkien is getting all confessional, right? And revealing things about his later reflections on the Silmarillion editorial process that are really, really cool. So anyway, that's I'm excited about that, getting there. But we're gonna finish phase 1 first, and yeah, Zach, boy, it is a challenge to keep the timeline in place, right? The second phase stuff, the general rule of thumb, my sense is here, I believe. Again, Christopher, of course, as he freely admits, is guessing on a lot of these dates, because the material he's working with here is just multiple layers of revisions on top of, draft after draft material and all that kind of stuff. So it's crazy to try to figure out exactly when, to date with accuracy any of these layers really precisely. But there's, anyway, he's trying to group it together so that what he's calling phase 1 is basically the stuff from the Quenta that Tolkien was revising in the early 50s, right around 50-51. And phase 2 is when Tolkien returns to it. So remember, the middle of the 50s is the publication time of The Lord of the Rings, right? So the early 50s material, 1950, 1951, that's the last writing of new stuff right? Before he was spending all of his extra time preparing the manuscript of the Lord of the Rings for publication. So the couple years up before 1954, that's what he was doing, right? And then, of course, you've got the publication, and you've got the frantic work on the appendices. The publication of the Return of the King was delayed a little bit, right, because of the preparation of the appendices. And then, of course, right after, he was still kind of caught up in thinking about Lord of the Rings stuff and answering questions about Lord of the Rings stuff and being surprised at the popularity of the Lord of the Rings and all that kind of thing. So he doesn't get back to the Silmarillion stuff until late 50s, like 1958-ish. So there is a gap of time between Phase 1 and Phase 2. Early 50s to late 50s. So it's a big gap, bigger than most of the gaps that we've been seeing. In fact, if you think about it, it's only a little bit smaller than the gap between the 1937 Quenta, that back when he was first preparing the Silmarillion for publication, right before he started work on the sequel, the stuff we were looking at in the Lost Road volume, and between that and Phase 1, right, the revision of the Ainulindale and the Round Earth stuff, right, all that, when he first comes back to the Silmarillion stuff after the Lord of the Rings, there's only a little bit more time in that huge gap during which the composition of the Lord of the Rings took place than there is in this later gap, right? That spans the publication time of the Lord of the Rings. Anyway, but yeah, boy, the Phase 2 stuff, really cool. So we'll get there. This evening, I am hoping. But before I go too much further, I didn't actually create a good question, do the announcements yet, which I totally should do. So first announcement, last night I did my State of the University address for spring of 2020, which is kind of a big thing. That is, like, spring of 2020 is kind of a big thing, a big moment in the history of Signum University. So this is more than a kind of a routine update about what's been happening lately at Signum. I am talking about what's happening lately at Signum and what's happening right now at Signum, but it's, as I say, it's a little bit more than just that. So I definitely commend that. That's up on YouTube. If you missed it, you can find it on YouTube. Of course, it's on our Twitch videos as well, but you can also find it on the go to the Signum University YouTube channel, and you should see it pinned pretty much up to the top there. So definitely recommend that if you didn't get a chance to see it. We are excited about the Signum Path program. Signum Path we just opened that for registration officially for the first time here. And Signum Path is officially launched. I've announced that a couple times. Just wanted to draw your attention back to the to that website. I should have that somewhere here. I always misplace it in the many things I have open here, but it's somewhere. I can't remember. Anyway. Oh yeah, there it is. Oh, hang on, behind the other tab there. There it is. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure to mention it, because obviously that's a really huge deal. To join us in our brand new program that we have going on here. Let me bring that over here. Oh, in the meantime, one other thing that I also wanted to make sure not to forget is it is election time here at the Mythgard Academy. So for those of you who are in our Council of the Wise, which is the collection of Signum's core supporters, everybody who donates $100 a year or more as part of our Council of the Wise and gets to vote on which books we talk about next. Now, we've long since reached the point where we're assuming we're going to continue with the we've been doing, the long-standing rule for the Mythgard Academy is that we don't do two books by any one author in a row, which generally has meant every other book is a non-Tolkien book, essentially, has been in practice what that has meant over the last, 7 years that we've been doing the Mythgard Academy now. So, and again, for some time, as we've been marching through the history of Middle-earth, that one has been fairly well determined. But the real excitement is, what will our next book be, right? What will our non-Tolkien book? We will presume that we're going to proceed on to the War of the Jewels after Morgoth's Ring. But in between those two, because we can't do them both in a row, in between those two, we will do some non-Tolkien book. And I am always keen to see what gets elected. Keep in mind, of course, I do not choose them. I've never chosen them. These are elected by our folks, and I am delighted to... I am excited to see what you guys choose. So actually the email just went out. I saw it just go out like minutes before class started. So you guys should be able to see that there. Now you could argue, Chris, you're right that you could argue that the History of Middle-earth books are by two authors, but yeah, no, it's still subject to the rule. Yeah, no, sorry, it counts. It counts. Yeah, there it is. Exactly. Jay's just looking at his email, and there it is. So yeah, the criteria for nominating books, it can be any book. Basically, the way that the nomination process works, you'll see there's a link in the email. So if you check your email, you'll find a link for the forum where books are nominated. There will be a preliminary vote among the council to choose the slate, right? To choose the finalists that will then go out to the whole electorate, and then the entire electorate, as everybody who has made a donation of any size, is going to be able to vote to see who wins. And there are often surprises. Yeah. Right, exactly, James. No other Christopher Tolkien books between the History of Middle-earth books either. That's right. It's the cruel restriction that we're operating under. That's right. So, yeah. Anyway, that's yeah. That's where we are. And just so yeah. So prepare yourself for that. It can be anything. There's no restrictions really on what the book should be. We'll say. I'm not going to say any more. Not going to say any more because I don't want to appear to be biasing things. But yeah, there we go. Excellent. I see. Interesting. Yeah. No, that would be an interesting nomination. Well, we'll see. Again, I'm not going to comment because who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? And it has been. Not only are all the books that we've done not of my own personal choosing, but there have been occasions on which a book has been nominated that I'd never even read before, as of course was most notably the case in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I'd never read before we did our discussion on it. It was fantastic. So glad to have read that and gotten the chance to discuss it with you guys. That was really fun. Yeah, exactly, Anna. We actually had done one that I'd never even read before. It is true that I theoretically have a veto. There are some books I'm not going to be cornered into doing, but I've never used it. It's never come to that. So we'll see. Yeah. See, Yana, you guys always tease me about Twilight, but I'll do it. I dare you. Elect Twilight. We'll talk about it. I'm ready. I'm not going to turn away from that. Oh yeah, Steven says, unfortunately, Susanna Clark's next book won't be out in time to nominate for this round. Yeah, I know that was. I've been hearing rumors that's been coming. So that'll be interesting. Nancy, am I still allowing non-book formats too? I don't see why not. I mean, it would be the one thing that would be hard is if it were like a film. There wouldn't be as much to talk about because a feature film is not really the equivalent of a novel. It's sort of the equivalent of a short story as far as so it would be like doing a short story. We could do a fun session or two on a film, but it wouldn't be. I don't think I would. It wouldn't be quite the same in that way. But like if somebody wanted to, if the electorate decided, that they wanted to talk about like a season of a television show or something, I'd do that. I'm willing to go there. I will say, like, footnote on that thing. if that happened, it's going to make it awful hard, actually, to have our recordings on YouTube, because, of course, I'm going to have to show clips or at least images, and usually that causes the friendly bots at Google to flag and take down our video because they think we're just trying to scam the movie, which, of course, we're not, but the bots can't tell. So, anyway, several people trying to fish for what book I would veto. I'm not going to tell you. Nope, not going there. No, you'd have to see. You'd have to see. Yep, exactly. Yeah, the copyright issues with film clips are really a challenge. But yeah. Do I have any in mind though, Kevin? Yeah, I do. But I'm not telling you what they are. I haven't had nearly enough to drink to admit to that. Anyway, so let me get back. As I was saying, I finally uncovered in the midst of all my windows that are open on my other screen our Signum Path website. So just to draw your attention back to this, please do share this with folks. This is our new program that we're really excited about, that I think can be a really, really big benefit to lots of people, both to individuals, to corporations, as a resource for HR and training folks who want to have a resource to be able to help the folks in their companies, all to build foundational skills, to help improve your writing skills, improve your communication skills, improve your emotional intelligence, and other kind of career-oriented skills, the kinds of things that will help you to get ahead in any kind of job that you have. And there's a real gap. And honestly, the kind of training that's available out there for these kinds of skills, well, it's done usually in a corporate training model, like asynchronous videos and stuff like that. And you just can't learn to write that way. You just can't. We are offering these as courses from a humanities perspective because, classically, over the centuries, it has been the humanities where these kinds of skills have been traditionally developed. And there's a good reason for that. The humanities are the best tools for this. So anyway, yeah, Christopher, that's a wonderful idea, suggesting it to church leadership. It would be really fun to do this, to like do a group for a church group or something. That'd be great. Anyway, this is our new program. Definitely commend our site to you. I've shown you our website a couple times. We have a bunch of new pages on here, much more information, which you can see if you want to get more information about our individual program. When I say that we're opening registration, I'm referring explicitly there to our individual program. The way that works is we offer rounds of our courses every month. So starting in June, we're offering our very first classes in June, but we're offering courses every month thereafter in a fairly regular cycle. But of course, we also do customized corporate courses, where, again, if we have a group that wants to come together and do the classes together from a particular company, we'll customize those for that group. And of course, that we're not sticking to our regular schedule. Again, we customize it, so we'll work that out with the company team separately. So with our corporate liaison who'll be assigned to them. So anyway, great program. I think, as I say, I think this is going to be a great opportunity for folks. So please just let folks know. Help us spread the word about Signum Path because it's brand new and it is pretty awesome. So, okay. Very good. I think I'm consulting my list of announcements to make sure that I'm not forgetting other announcements, because that's like those are our big announcements that I definitely wanted to share. I did, of course, wanted to mention also, I knew there was another thing. Of course, we've started our summer semester this term. I'll come in on that sentence again. We started our summer semester this week. How about that? That's exactly what happened on Monday. So our classes have begun for the summer. We have our Old Norse class, our new Star Wars class, really great classes this semester. We have one of the highest enrollments we've ever had. I think the highest number of credit students we've ever had at Signum University this summer. It's amazing, and it puts the capstone on the year, this past academic year, 2019 to 2020 academic year, we've had more credit enrollments this past year than we've ever had in a single academic year in our 9-year history now. So really exciting time, even not only for our new program, Signum Path, and the planning for future programs down the road, as I was discussing last night, but also in our existing program. Our existing MA program is reaching new heights that it never has before. And our selection of classes for this summer is a great illustration of what's exciting in our master's degree program right now. So there's still time to join. If you've been thinking about auditing or even thinking about taking a class for credit this semester, not too late. You can still join up through next week. But sooner, at this point, sooner is definitely better. So just wanted to make sure to announce that. All right, let us move forward then, so that I can get to the steamy, juicy details there at the beginning of Phase 2, which I found so very delightful. Not to say, again, that this earlier stuff isn't delightful, because there are still several threads that I am particularly interested in pursuing. And who knows, maybe, I've talked about how, like, some of the things, some of the elements and concepts in the developing story that Christopher Tolkien is clearly most interested in are not exactly the ones that I'm most interested in. So for all I know, you guys are thinking the same thing about me and are like, oh, can we be done talking about whether or not he's, Melkor's creating orcs or not? Well, no, I can't be done talking about that. That's one of the themes I'm really interested in tracing. But here's another interesting one, which really began to obtrude itself upon my notice pretty significantly here in this section that we're going to start talking about tonight. That is the latter half of Phase 1. Here's the passage. The sons of Fingolfin were Fingon, who was after king of the gnomes, changed to Noldor, in the north of the world, and Turgon of Gondolin, and their sister was Isfin, changed to Irith the White. Added, she was younger in the years of the Eldar than her brethren, and when she was grown to full stature and beauty, she was greater and stronger than woman's wont, and she loved much to ride on horse and to hunt in the forests, and there was often in the company of her kinsmen, and there was often in the company of her kinsmen. No, right, like there, she was, when she was there, she was often, okay, sorry, I'm getting my emphasis right. And there was often in the company of her kinsmen, the sons of Feanor. But to none was her heart's love given. She was called the White Lady of the Noldor, for though her hair was dark, she was pale and clear of hue, and she was ever arrayed in silver and white. The sons of Finrod, changed to Finarfin, were Inglor, changed to Finrod, the Faithful, who afterwards was named Felagund, Lord of Caves, Struckout and Orodreth, and Angrod, and Egnor, changed to Eignor. And these four, changed to three, the sons of Finrod, Finarfin, dropping like flies. And these three were as close in friendship with the sons of Fingolfin as though they were all brethren together. A sister they had, Galadriel, the fairest lady of the house of Finwë and the most valiant. Her hair was lit with gold, as though it had caught in a mesh the radiance of Laurelin. Okay, several things of interest there. Let's start, of course, with the final thing, and one of the most sort of obviously striking, and that is the inclusion of Galadriel. It's, of course, one of the kind of minor notes, which I think is always of interest, to see those places where he is actually retconning the Lord of the Rings characters into the Silmarillion tradition, right? We've seen that in some very minor ways with Círdan the Shipwright, who was not invented before but only came up during the Lord of the Rings. We've seen that in some very interesting but very limited ways with Aloran, right, with Gandalf. We were just looking at one of those passages last week. And, of course, Galadriel. Galadriel, possibly the most dramatic of these retcon elements. Dramatic in the sense that she is one of the most important characters of the Lord of the Rings who, in retrospect, needs to be one of the most important characters of the Silmarillion. Let me rephrase that. Of the characters in The Lord of the Rings who were also present historically during the Silmarillion, she is the most important of those, right? I mean, if she's going to be the daughter of Finarfin, that puts her right smack in the middle of the action, right, of the Silmarillion. You can't say that about people like Gandalf or Círdan, or Saruman or whoever, right? They're not right smack in the middle of the action. Sauron is too, but that has been already a retcon that he's been working on, especially as we saw back during the Númenórean stuff in the Notion Club papers and such. Okay. All right. So yes, so Galadriel. So whenever she comes up, any of them, but of course with this, especially her, it's sort of particularly interesting. Now, first, notice one thing about Galadriel's mention here, right? And that is, she gets superlatives. Right? Now, they're relative superlatives. They're not the absolute superlatives that we sometimes see, right? Like the one that Thingol gets. He was the tallest of all of the children of Ilúvatar. Or the one that Luthien gets, right? Fairest of all, she's the most beautiful. And of course, Fëanor hoards the superlatives like a dragon on its hoard, right? So we get those, right? And Galadriel's not getting those. She is the fairest lady of the House of Finwë and the most valiant. So, they're not like big superlatives. She's not the fairest of all of the elves, because then she'd be competing with Luthien. And she's not called the most valiant of everybody, right? But see, those two are taken already, right? Luthien is already the fairest lady. Right? Galadriel's awesome, but she's not going to knock Luthien off that pedestal, right? And she can't be the most valiant, because Fingolfin is already, listed for his being the most valiant of the House of Finwë, so we can't get there. Yes, Kevin, exactly. Turin Turambar is going to get the hottest human ever title. Absolutely. Yeah, Turin is going to have his own collection of superlatives. You will notice a trend, of course, between people who get lots of superlatives and people who kind of end up being rather bad eggs, right? I mean, you've got like Turin and Fëanor and like Melkor, right, all on an island kind of together there. Yeah, but Yana, exactly. It is the problem with absolute superlatives, is that you can only use them once. Absolutely. And this, of course, is one of the clear challenges. And another one of those places that we've seen before, where Tolkien has to make choices, right? Again, in this whole marriage of the Lord of the Rings world and the Silmarillion world that he's been doing, one of the things that we've been talking about that he is sort of struggling with, right, is wanting to maintain, on the one hand, his commitment to his mythology, right, and the stories that he's been telling, while at the same time, on the other hand, to try to stay true to the consistently built world, the kind of consistently built world, not to mention the specific world that he was building during The Lord of the Rings. And that, of course, has been the central issue with things like the orc issue that we've discussed several times. Here, we see a similar thing, but it's not exactly the same, right? This is like a clash between the new myths and the old myths, right? Galadriel, really important, right? And where she grows to over the course of the Lord of the Rings, right? From like the queen of those random elves, that he has the company meet on the road as he did not anticipate, right? Between Rivendell and Mount Doom. Galadriel is absolutely in that category of a funny thing happened on the way to Mount Doom, right? Anyway, but she grows into something really big and really important. And yet, when we get to go back and put her in the Silmarillion, there's a lot of really big, important people. And Yana, exactly as you say, somebody's claimed dibs on all of the superlatives already. And so he has to, he absolutely has to do one of two things. He either has to have Galadriel look fairly small on the Silmarillion stage, right? Either she's got to look like an extra, right? Or he's got to bump people off their pedestals, which is going to mean making some really big fundamental changes. Now, it's not as big, right? Even going so far as displacing Luthien, that would be big. Not saying that's not big, but even that is, in a sense, less big than like the round world thing, right? We're not talking about a fundamental shift to how he conceives of his mythology working, right? We're just talking about a change in characters. Now, again, like the Luthien thing would be huge, and he doesn't really seem to contemplate that. But anyway, it is interesting that he is inclined to throw their second-rate superlatives, arguably third-rate superlatives, right? Because the superlatives that she's being given are not only within the House of Finwë, right? So therefore eliminating her from competition with like Luthien, but also lady is there, right? So we've got a gender thing also. So like of the women in the House of Finwë, she was the fairest and the most valiant. And that's, beginning to be a kind of a smaller pool, right, that she is standing out in. Now, Yana, I agree with you that this does really play well into the general fading theme, right? To show her be the level of superlatives that she's getting here, show that she is even on stage with all of the rest of the cast of the Silmarillion, she's still striking, right? She's not a nobody. She's not an extra. She's, she's not going to get any nomination. If she gets any nominations, it'll be for Best Supporting Actress, right? She's not the leading lady here in this particular play, but she's not an extra either. And it does set things up, Yana, and it certainly does fit, right, within the whole kind of mythological framework of the Lord of the Rings, that by the time we get to the Third Age, and things have been fading and declining, that now she should be at that point, right, getting some really big superlatives, especially in the Middle-earth context. I know Galadriel isn't third class, Carrie. I don't really mean that. I said she's given third class superlatives. That's all. But it's still a superlative, right? I mean, it can't take away from the fact that it's still a superlative. And yes, Tony, it's true that everybody else is dead or gone. I know, but that's the point, right? I don't mean that as a backhanded compliment. Like, congratulations, you win, like, person who didn't happen to die award, right? But first of all, that's not nothing, right? I mean, that's a significant accomplishment in the context. But secondly, it's but again, more than that, that's what the fading means, right? Is that everyone else has gone. That's like the definition of fading. Okay. Anyway, so that's the first thing. Now, notice the second thing about Galadriel there. Her hair. We get a whole sentence about Galadriel's hair. Her hair was lit with gold as though it had caught in a mesh the radiance of Laurelin. Why do we get a sentence about Galadriel's hair? Anybody else's hair? We get a sentence about? A whole sentence dedicated to their hair color? Not just color, obviously. There's much more to it than that. No. Yeah, this is totally because of Gimli. It's absolutely Gimli's fault. Because remember, that all came first. Like, you can't, when we're studying this, we always have to keep in mind the sequence here, right? Gimli does not ask for a lock of her hair or a single one of her hairs, right? Because of this passage, right? This passage is there because Gimli asked for her hair. So we've got her hair being a big deal, but notice the kind of big deal it is, right? What kind of big deal is it? It's not just that something is being said about it, That's interesting all by itself, right? Most of the rest of the people, we don't even know what their hair color is, right? It's not important in the story, right? But what else? Yes, the link to Laurelin. It ties it to the trees. How? Notice how? Her hair was lit with gold. Notice he doesn't say her hair was lit with gold like the blossoms of Laurelin, right? Or that's not what he says. As though it had caught in a mesh the radiance of Laurelin, right? Exactly. Her hair is like it's like a Silmaril, right? It's like a budget Silmaril, or like a natural Silmaril, really, right? It's amazing. I mean, this is a huge deal. That Galadriel's hair should be like the Silmarils themselves, right? It is as though it had caught in a mesh the radiance of Laurelin, right? So that Gimli, and why should that be? Why should that be? Because Gimli's going to put it in imperishable crystal, of course, right? We already have the visual picture of Galadriel's hair encased in imperishable crystal, right? As an heirloom, which will be guarded jealously by Gimli and his heirs after him, right? I mean, it's yeah. Oh, and absolutely, Yana, there is I mean, if it makes you think of Sif's hair from Norse mythology, yeah, sure, no accident. I mean, I don't think that's a. I don't think that Gimli's request of her hair is utterly unrelated to that. I mean, I think that's clearly one of those things in the back of Tolkien's mind. But Tony, exactly. We have like the Arkenstone recreated, essentially. Right, the Arkenstone, which is already itself a kind of like diet Silmaril, right? Well, I mean, really, it was a recycled Silmaril, obviously, in The Hobbit before The Hobbit was made continuous. And notice what happens to the Arkenstone after the Hobbit world is really brought into contact with the Silmarillion world. We never mention it again, right? Like it's Ixnay on the. Well, you can't really do Arkenstone in Pig Latin, can you? But anyway, so really interesting, right? Really interesting that he is associating, in a sense, right? He is associating Galadriel and Feanor through the concept of the Silmarils. Right, but of course it's different because this is her hair, right? I mean, she doesn't. It's not like, as you know, she is like one of the Noldor who, like, you know, invented, like, with Noldor and cunning, you know, a hair dye which affected this, right? This is just her hair, right? So it's not in that way, of course, parallel to Feanor, but anyway, she is exactly, Bruce. Yeah, they buried it with Thorin, and we will never speak of it again, apparently. But anyhow, yeah. So, right, John says, so that's what they did with the vats of light. Yeah, exactly. She used to go down for weekly treatments. You know, get her roots done from the vats of Laurelin. I'm kidding. That didn't happen. Again, so this is just her hair. But so he gives her superlative. So what has happened in the integration of Galadriel? Very little is said about her here, right? She's being given discount superlatives, right? And her hair is being made into is like, she gets a sentence, right, about her hair. One of those Lord of the Rings elements is being brought back. Is being brought into play here, and starting to be connected with some of the core mythological elements. That hair sentence is, to me, really interesting in this way, because we saw her added in to the early, I'm pretty sure it was in the Annals, when we got the speech of Fëanor under Torchlight, right, when he moves the Noldor to rebel and to leave Tyrion. And we got that was one of the first places where Galadriel was really retconned back into the story. And we're told that she also, though like she didn't have any truck with Fëanor, was moved, right? And she too desired maybe to have a realm of her own, right? So we got her worked into that, into the story. That his impulse, but nevertheless, she was kind of a rider, right? I mean rider in the legal sense, like a clause added at the bottom, right, of the contract, right? She was there's a little bit of she was a little bit of an appendage on that one, but here. The business about her hair, which starts with Gimli's request, is now here being worked into the mythological structure of the Silmarillion story, right? I mean, her hair is like a Silmaril, and that is the seed of a thing, right? Which I think is really interesting. And Tony, you're right. It does make her a kind of anti-Luthien. Luthien's hair is like a shadow following, right? Luthien is shadow and she is light. You know, it's like the two of them could have like a Marvel spin-off series or something. Yes, exactly. Very, very different, very opposite from her. Yeah. And Jocelyn, you're right. It is also a typical gender stereotype that females defined by appearance and physical characteristics. Yes, the fact that the first superlative, even if it's a third-rate superlative, that she's given is fairest, right? She's the most beautiful. Nothing wrong with that, right? That's fine, but I agree. Now, she is called Valiant as well, right? And those two are an interesting pairing. The fairest lady of the House of Finwë and the most valiant, right? And so that is sort of singled out there, her valor as well as her beauty. But I certainly agree. The way that does fall in line in that way. Yeah. So we'll see sort of what comes with that. And Jennifer, you're absolutely right that one of the concepts there, right? One of the consequences, right, of the way that he is now integrating this germ of an idea which begins with Gimli's request, right, and is now beginning to take shape within the context of the Silmarillion mythology, does also retroactively elevate Gimli's request, right? It makes Gimli's request for a strand of her hair even... Gimli had no idea, really? I mean, did Gimli know that he was making, like a DIY Arkenstone? No, that wasn't his plan, right? He wasn't scheming at that. But the way that this has worked out, yeah, in retrospect, now it looks like that, right? And you're absolutely right, Matt, that Éomer and Gimli do point it out. Éomer and Gimli's near competition, right? The sort of that very Arthurian moment, which I always find so delightful at the end of The Lord of the Rings. Éomer and Gimli's near duel, right? The contrast between Arwen, who is like the second Luthien, right, and Galadriel, is we can see, so even within the context of The Lord of the Rings, this idea of Luthien and Galadriel as kind of opposite pairings, right? The seed of that is clearly there already in Éomer's words about Arwen, the Queen, and Galadriel. Yeah. Good. Okay. Oh, hang on, I'm not done about this. Just first of all, notice this looks to be about the place when Orodreth is starting to get his demotion, right? So Orodreth's name is getting crossed off lists now. Really hard to tell exactly when. Christopher is clearly suggesting that the crossing out of Orodreth dates from this period, right? This is the time in which Tolkien begins to have questions. You remember, Orodreth originally was the original Lord of Nargothrond. Like Finrod wasn't even the Lord of Nargothrond. Orodreth was the original Lord of Nargothrond, and then he's Orodreth has been kind of getting demoted and demoted, even being knocked down to one of the lesser sons of Finarfin. Was a demotion for him, and now he's getting apparently further demoted and removed from the list. Notice how many sentences we get about Isfin, Irith, of course, whom we know to be Arathel. She's one whose name is not yet settled. Of course, we see several people whose names are still not quite settled out to the place where we would expect them to be. Though they're getting there, right? Finrod changing to Finarfin, Inglor changing to Finrod. Yeah. Anyway, so we'll keep an eye on that. The Orodreth story is a minor sort of development, but it's kind of an interesting one to me, especially knowing the position that he played before. And when I say position that he played, I don't just mean like the fact that he happened to be put in charge of Nargothrond. I mean in the story, in the important stories that Tolkien was telling, in particular the Children of Húrin, the Children of Húrin. Orodreth's, like, the high water mark for Orodreth was, I think, the alliterative lay of the Children of Húrin. It was a big deal, right? Orodreth was kind of a big deal, even though he was still a little namby-pamby even there. But nevertheless, that was a character flaw, not a prestige issue as far as Tolkien's planning is concerned. So, but anyway, so it's a big deal, right? I mean, I talked about, is he going to be willing to make changes, right? I mean, is he going to demote somebody else so that Galadriel can basically take that person's place within the mythology, right? And although we see him not exactly doing that, we see him making some changes, which, again, though not as earth-shattering as like changing Luthien or something like that, is still, a fairly big kind of deal. John, it is interesting. So the character of Isfin, let's just call her Isfin for now. I don't want to probably not actually less confusing or more confusing to call her Arathel, but anyway, let's just call her the White Lady of the Noldor, shall we? What we're told about what the White Lady of the Noldor does, as John points out, sound like Diana, right? Sound like Artemis in some ways. She's this woman hunter, and her non-married status, right? Her singleness is emphasized, right? To none was her heart's love given. So yes, we have this virgin huntress among the Noldor, and that's interesting, right? It's interesting that he does this, and I would say as well, it's interesting to me that she gets all this text, right? And notice how he's added it in, right? The original text was a list. The sons of Fingolfin were Fingon, who was after King of the Gnomes in the north of the world, and Turgon of Gondolin, and their sister was Isfin the White. And then, right, skipping all the bits that he added, it then just goes to the sons of Finrod were Inglor the Faithful, who after was named Felagund, Lord of Caves, and Orodreth and Angrod and Egnor, right? In other words, he's not, in the original, when he originally writes it, he's not saying anything in particular about almost any of them, right? This is really just a catalog. And in the midst of this catalog, he adds this whole section about Isfin, right? About the White Lady. That's kind of interesting to me. Interesting to me that he goes back and includes all this stuff. And it is not because he then goes on to invent the Eol story and now is like going back to set it up here, right? Or at least I think that can't be the only reason. And I say that because for two reasons. One, he's already invented the Eos. A version of that existed before. So that's not like a whole new thing that's going to come around. We had Isfin being involved in a sketchy marriage earlier on. And of course, we had Maegwyn the traitor early on as well, back in the Book of Lost Tales. So that's not exactly a brand new development, which itself would explain why all of a sudden he's doing this. But the other thing is that, okay, yeah, so yeah, she's going to get a future story, right? So are a bunch of these guys, right? So is Finrod, for crying out loud, right? You know, so is Ignor, for the matter of that, right? I remember this is right around the period when we're working towards the Athrobeth. So yeah, Ignor's got some storyline coming to him. Turgon, needless to say, and he doesn't insert additions on any of those, right? But it's her that he comes in on, and this will be the last thing I will say about this slide before we move on. Is an interesting trend that I'm noticing here. There are two women in this list, right? Like, numerically speaking, we've got, if you count Finarfin and Fingolfin, right? We've got Finarfin and Fingolfin, and then Fingon and Turgon, and then Finrod, and let's count Orodreth before he gets crossed out, and Angrod and Ignor, right? So we've got 8 men and 2 women. So the women are only 20% by number of this description, but look at what percentage they are of the prose. And that's a little interesting to me. And in this context, because of course my attention was piqued by the fact that this was a paragraph working Galadriel back in, but the fact that that happened, and the extra sentence about her hair and stuff in the same paragraph as we got this added chunk of prose added to give more background to Isfin, right, struck me as really kind of interesting. And it's a trend I began to notice after this. Just sort of reflecting, we get a lot more lady folk in the House of Finwë. We get a lot of, there's a whole bunch of female Noldor running around in the story that were certainly not there in the Book of Lost Tales. And that's an interesting thing, and let's sort of see how this goes and continues. In the meanwhile, let's actually move on. So this is one of Christopher's notes. The passage describing the White Lady of the Noldor was added on a slip to the original Quenta Silmarillion typescript, that is the QS1 typescript. And this slip is a page from a used engagement calendar dated October 1951. And you know that kind of thing. That's like the kind of thing that makes a textual editor just like punch the air. Like, yes! Oh, a dated engagement calendar. Like of all the things his dad could have written this on and shoved it in the manuscript, it was something with a date on it. Oh, that is gold right there. Gold. But anyway, at that stage, her name was still Isfin. A rejected draft for this writer on the same slip began thus. She was younger in the years of the Eldar than her brethren, for she awoke in Valinor, not upon Middle-earth. Changed to, awoke in Valinor after the making of the Silmarils, and even as the first shadow fell upon the Blessed Realm, and when she was grown to full stature. The words, she was younger in the years of the Eldar than her brethren, for she awoke in Valinor, not upon Middle-earth, are not in accord with the annals of Aman, where Fingolfin, their father, was himself born in Aman, right? Remember, of course, Feanor, when the annals, Feanor was the first second-generation elf of all, and he was born in Middle-earth, but the rest of them were born in Valinor. Anyway, to me, the most interesting, I mean, yes, that's interesting that he's revising when they were born and stuff. But notice the status that he's giving to Isfin here. Not just about her being younger. Okay, great, cool. So she's younger. That's fine. And even as the first shadow fell upon the Blessed Realm, and when she was grown to full stature, right? So he makes her birth have a kind of mythic significance to it. See what I mean? He draws attention to her birth, not just because he's trying to log it, right? And you know, because he's not writing annals anymore. Remember, this is the Quenta. She's born after the making of the Silmarils. She's born even as the first shadow fell upon the Blessed Realm, right? Do you see what I mean? By saying like her life, her birth is being given a kind of mythic significance itself. This doesn't necessarily prove that she's a super important character in herself, like as far as what she accomplishes, but it gives her significance. And so Jennifer, absolutely, it does, I think, contextualize for us some of the stuff that's going to happen in her story, right? Her restlessness, Jennifer, as we can see, right? She is being associated from her birth here, at least in this moment in Tolkien's imagination. She is being associated with the restlessness, with the unrest of the Noldor, right? She is, in this sense, a child of the decline of Valinor, a product of the decline of Valinor. She never saw the noontide of Valinor. She is associated with the rise of shadow from the beginning, the rise of the shadow and the descent of the shadow upon the Blessed Realm. Again, it's interesting to me. I'm not trying to claim that he's making her character really important, right? But it didn't have to be her. It didn't have to be her, right? He has chosen her character. He is paying much more attention to her. He has made her sort of the pivot point, right? Not because she is the one doing the actions, right? And it makes me wonder. Here, I will ask the question, and I'm not 100% sure what the answer is, but I will ask the question that I couldn't help but find myself asking as I was noticing the stuff I was just pointing out about the women, the female Noldor. Is Tolkien, do we have reason to think that in this time, in the 50s, Tolkien is actively working to increase the profile of his female characters in the Silmarillion? Obviously, there are some female characters, like Luthien, at the top of the list, who have been hugely important from the beginning, right? But is there an impulse on Tolkien's part that we can see? Right? Is there a trend within these revisions towards the self-conscious elevation, inclusion of females who were completely omitted, the elevation of females who were there but didn't get a really prominent role? This smells like that to me, right? That he's not inventing Isfin from scratch. He's not even inventing the Eöl story with her from scratch. Again, that the building blocks of that were already there, unless I'm totally misremembering. I'm pretty sure they're there from earlier on. But he is pausing here. In the edition, the two drafts of this edition, we can see him lending her a kind of significance which raises her profile pretty significantly, not just the add-on sister of the list, right? So I don't know. No, Jocelyn. So this would be, this can't be a response to criticism, at least not criticism, like public criticism. Because remember, this is still happening before the publication of The Lord of the Rings. Okay, so there aren't any female character. Well, there's only one female character in The Hobbit, not counting Belladonna Took, who is dead, right? So there's one posthumous female character in The Hobbit. Quiz, trivia question: who's the female character in The Hobbit? Anybody name the female character in The Hobbit? Nope. Female who actually appears in the action, interacts with the characters. Nope. Lobelia doesn't. We hear about her, right? But she doesn't interact with anybody. Yana, you've got it. James Liebeck has it too. The spider that Bilbo kills with Sting when he names the sword, right? And he wakes up and there's a spider and he kills it. Female. There you go. So I know that doesn't really do much to please anybody who's discontented about the fact that there are no female characters in The Hobbit. But anyway, there you go. So, yes, the last daughter of Shelob to trouble the unhappy forest, Arthur. That's it. Yeah, in that way, she is. I do agree, a precursor of Shelob. No, David Urbach is wondering if perhaps the conversation between the spiders that Bilbo overhears would enable the Hobbit to pass the Bechdel test. I'm not really sure if that would count according to the rules, but you'd have to ask somebody who knows that more than I. But anyway, yeah. So anyhow, okay. I'm digressing. Point is, I can't help but notice how in that paragraph we were just reading, and notice how my second slide is kind of cheating and I'm still talking about the same thing. How in that paragraph, he does seem to be, he's lingering on the 2 women out of the 10 in the list, right? He's not changed the list, except for adding Galadriel. But he is noticeably lingering on the 2 women. And this edition in particular, the one that doesn't make the cut, right? The rejected first impulse shows, I think, especially if we take this passage about the even as the first shadow fell upon the blessed realm stuff, right? And the reference to Galadriel's hair and it being like a Silmaril. He is not only saying something about the women, right? These are not token statements about the women. He is developing their significance within the native mythology of the Silmarillion. Notice what he's also doing, right? What he's also resisting, right? Is displacing anybody. Tolkien does not seem willing in general he doesn't like to change the core elements of his mythology that were already there, as we've seen in other contexts, right? So he's not going to take one of the major characters like Fingolfin or Finrod, Felagund, or Turgon, right? And make them female. We're not going to see him do that exactly. But nevertheless, the 8 men are still all there, right? He doesn't cut any of the men. He doesn't replace them with women. But I think we can see, at least anyway, data point number 1 of possibly him dedicating some more time than they got in any of the earlier versions. Yeah. And I certainly agree, Lynn, that although women don't take up many pages, they are often significant characters. And I would say, even, Lynn, we can see that same pattern being reflected here, right? Again, he's not balancing the scales numerically. He's not made any changes there at all, again, apart from the addition of Galadriel. But certainly, again, you look at that passage and it's way more than 80% or 20% of that prose, right, is dedicated to the women. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Oh, Christopher says it's an interesting precursor to the you-know-who character who may not be mentioned. You're not talking about Toriel, are you? This is why, by the way, I never objected to Toriel as a concept, as a character. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah. Anyway, we'll see. We'll keep going. I love Christopher's note on Galadriel's name. Here Galadriel enters the Quenta tradition. This is his footnote on that paragraph too. For Galadriel in the Annals of Aman, see that other passage that we already talked about, the one about her, that I already mentioned, about her response to Feanor's speech. On one copy of LQ2, that is the later Quenta 2 manuscript, or typescript rather, my father noted, in High Elvish, her name was Altariella, Lady with Garland of Sunlight. Galata Rig El equals Sindarin Galadriel. It was thus mere accident that her name resembled Galav, Sylvan Galad tree. So this is Christopher pointing out that although Galadriel lives among the Galathrim, that is a coincidence, linguistically speaking, right? Okay. I suppose I'm willing to believe that. Look, it certainly wouldn't be the first time that kind of thing that kind of thing happened, right? When Tolkien, who thinks first and foremost in terms of etymologies and the development of words, right? That he is able to come up with a name or a word which looks like it has an obvious explanation, but of course has in fact not anything to do with it. Like how, of course, like Tyrion upon tuna has nothing to do with fish. But anyway, but I'm not sure I believe this at all. To be totally honest with you, when we're introduced to Galadriel of the Galathrim, it kind of, I mean, all right, like, you know, it kind of looks like a duck and quacks like a duck at that point. Right now, retroactively, he is changing that. Right, he has developed a new. And again, and this is such a very Tolkien thing to do, right? He's got Galadriel's name, and he's gonna there's an element now of her character that he is developing, that he's focusing on, right? Namely her hair. Like, that's become a big deal. Now, retroactively, it's become a big deal, right? So he has developed a new name for her, a new etymology for her name to explain it, and it has no longer anything to do with the Galathrim. She's no longer the queen of the tree elves, which was the whole point of her character when her character was invented at the very beginning. When he met her, right, in the Lord of the Rings. So, yeah. But of course, Tony, you're absolutely right. This is a very Tolkien thing. Tony Mead is pointing out this is one of his favorite Tolkien linguistic moments when he makes light and tree cognates, right? And I agree. It's awesome, right? Notice how in doing that, right, in connecting her name, in at least articulating, if not changing, right, the etymology of her name to connect her to light, right, to sunlight, and saying it's only an accident that her name happens to resemble the word for tree, we get the mythic significance of her hair, right, baked into the entire linguistic situation. And that's awesome, right? That is super cool. Yeah, exactly, David. The Galathrim means tree people. Yeah, exactly. And of course, he spelled her name originally with the DH, Galadriel. Galadriel, Queen of the Galathrim, was her name. And if you insist that that was a pure coincidence at the time when he came up with it, I'll only say with Gaffer Gamgee, it takes a lot of believing, right? And in any case, I don't think it's a big deal. I see no reason not to believe that he is retroactively changing the etymology of her name. Why shouldn't he, right? And that he's doing it in such a way to make this really elegant linguistic, like philological pun on like how her name evokes the two trees, and doubling down on the whole Galadriel as living Silmaril thing. I mean, come on, that's awesome, right? And the fact that that wasn't what he was thinking at the beginning does not decrease that in my mind at all. I think it's pretty awesome. Yeah, and Brian, you're right. You do lose the sense that her people take their name from her, right? But perhaps they too appreciate the like she is to them. She is like Laurelin to them, right? She is their tree of light, right? And they are like the mini Calaquendi, right, who are elevated by being in the presence of the light of their own tree of light, right? So is their name still connected with her name? Yeah, in a sense, but a cooler sense, right? A really interesting sense. But anyway, yeah, yeah. Hawthorne is saying he can easily see it being a coincidence, as the roots appear to date back to pre-Lord of the Rings Elvish. Yeah, these do, sure. Anyway, yeah, no, it's possible. Again, I don't think it's utterly impossible. But again, to me, that's not the point, right? Whether or not it was in his original conception, who cares? What's really interesting is the way that this is just like how the story is developing, right? We don't have to, hold him to the first version of the story. What we're interested in is how is the story growing in his mind, and if that's what's happening here, cool. If not, that's cool too. It's interesting. Yeah, Christopher, maybe it is like the naming of Elessar by his people, not who didn't know that was his name foretold, right? Who knows? Maybe that was exactly it. Okay. More on the philological subject. You will remember, of course, and we were talking about the Chlamas a little bit, I think, last week as well, right? The philological origins of so many of the stories and how we can see that stuff growing. This was one of my favorite moments where we can still hear that in the background, right? The first the first of the things he's talking about here concerns the sentence, "For nigh on 100 of the years of Valinor, which were each as 10 years of the years of the sun that were after made." That is describing the number of years in which the Teleri lived on Toloresia on the way. Remember when they're on the island and it gets stuck in traffic, right, in the Bay of Eldamar, and they don't make it all the way to Valinor, right? And so how long did they live there before they went on and set up at Alqualande, right? And so in the first draft, he had said nigh on 100 of the years of Valinor, reminding us when he said that's in fact 1,000 years of the sun that they lived there on Toloresia before they got to the mainland. And here the following was substituted. "For well nigh 100 of the years of our time, though that be but 10 of the years of the Valar, they dwelt in Toloresia." Christopher says, "The reduction of the time during which the Teleri dwelt apart in Toloresia from 1,000 to 100 years of the sun was clearly made for linguistic reasons. 1,000 years would introduce such changes as to make the tongues of the Noldor, a people in any case changeful in speech, we were told, and the Teleri into different languages, which could not conceivably draw together again, as they are going to do we're going to be told that they're going to do in a couple paragraphs. In the Annals of Aman, the lost reckoning of only 100 years of the sun is present." Okay, just sort of a note. This stuff is still in the background, right? I think we have passed the point where the linguistic situation, although I absolutely, believe and can see, and this is one of the things that I had most fun talking about when we were reading the Chlamas back in The Lost Road. We can see how the whole shape of his mythology, the whole sort of progress of the First Age, is foreshadowed, or sort of is all a later embodiment of the different linguistic situations that he was imagining in his Tree of Tongues, right? In his imagining his imagined development and bifurcations and cross influencings and everything else of the Elvish tongues. But I think that we've passed the point where those are the things that are driving the stories. The stories have taken on a life of their own now, right? And we can see them, but yet they've not forgotten it completely. And so his impulse here was to say and to spell out, for 1,000 years they are apart. But then he gets twitchy, right? And he's like, yeah, no, it can't be 1,000 years, because if it were 1,000 years, there would be too much, that doesn't fit the linguistic situation. So he's not willing to leave it, right? He's not willing to change, so he still wants to sort of maintain the anchor in the basic linguistic situation, which has informed the whole stories, and of course still plays a part in the the names of people and the languages as they occur and emerge within the stories. All that stuff is still operative, right? And so we can see it still being operative. But again, I don't think that it exactly drives the story. Now, Tomas, that's a very sensible question, and I think that it's definitely something that I'm thinking of too. That is, would language evolve just as quickly in a society of long-lived folk as compared to mortal men's? Don't most language changes happen between generations? An excellent question. It would be easy for me to imagine a linguistic situation that is much more static, because you've got an immortal race of people, right? So people get, kind of like people, imagining elves as being sort of like those folks who move to a different part of the country or move to a different country, but still 30 years later still have their original accent, right? They have not acclimated their accent to the place where they live. Would elves kind of be like that, except in millennia, right? Rather than in decades. As I say, Tomas, I can easily imagine that, right? I can easily imagine that would be, but that's not how Tolkien imagined it, right? Tolkien definitely didn't imagine that way. He, part of his core mythology is the fecundity of the imagination, of the subcreation of the elves, right? He is not, I think, intending to suggest that if you took people in our world, made them immortal, right, and took linguistic notes, I don't think this is him predicting that this is what would happen. Rather, again, it's part of his mythology. It's part of his story that the languages of these people do change, right? And why do they change? Because it is an expression of their subcreation. The language of the Noldor is changeable, not due to any external influence. It can be due to external influence, but just because they themselves are always changing it. They're always refining it. They're always developing new ways and new ways of speaking about things. Yeah. It is an interesting. I don't think that this is Tolkien making, as I say, a general note about how languages do in fact change. Rather, it is a testimony to how the changefulness of language forms a central part of his mythology. And I would say this before I end on this subject. I think it might work the other way around. That is, I was just suggesting that it makes sense that the Noldor are changeful in their speech because they are subcreative, right? Because of the fecundity of their imagination. But in fact, I think if there's going to be a because statement made about that, it should go the other way around, right? Tolkien's mythology of the elves has as one of its cornerstones the fundamentally subcreative nature of the elves, because he envisions the languages ritually changing and developing over time, right? I suspect that the cause and effect works the other way around, right? He first imagined a situation in which you have that. Remember, in a sense, Tolkien's elves are, historically speaking, an expression of his language. He first invents a languages, and develops a history for those languages and how those languages change over time, and he makes them dynamic because the changing of the language over time is what he's most interested in. That's what he loves. That's the hobby, right? So he invents these changeful and sort of interlocking languages, and he needs, so that's what he has. That's what he starts with. So he needs a character that fits that, right? He needs a people. He has the languages, and he needs to give them a people. And he needs to give them a people that fit them, and that fit the kind of linguistic situation that he has designed. So yeah, I kind of suspect that the elves are sub-creators fundamentally in the way that they are. Some of that might be due to theology, but I think the whole being made in the image of a maker thing, as he said very famously elsewhere in his poem, but I think some of it also is based on, has its birth in the linguistic situation here. Yeah, exactly, Brie. It's exactly like that. Brie says them actively altering their language rather than just having their language passively altered over time makes sense, especially when thinking of how much an artist's individual style will change over time. Exactly. When an artist is very active, right? Refining his or her art, right? It can't stay exactly the same, right? It's how it works. And so, again, that's the character of the race that fits the language situation that he had developed, right? So it makes a lot of sense. But anyway, so like I said, when thinking about the relationship between his stories and his languages, we often have to remember back that way. Like a lot of the because statements go from the language to the story, not the other way around. Even the most basic things like why elves, right? Even that goes back, I think, first and foremost to the languages. But by this time, by the early 50s, I don't think any longer it is 100% driving the story. The stories are taking on lives of their own. The stories and the characters are taking on lives of their own. But again, he's not forgetting the linguistic situation, and he's not going to simply abandon it entirely, even though he's willing to make some fairly significant changes. Like, for instance, you may remember that the elves who have become the Green Elves of Osirian, right? That other separate group of elves who comes across the mountains later than everybody else, and parks relatively near Doriath, right? That story, way back at the beginning in the Hlamas, right, that's one of those stories which is most clearly established in the Tree of Tongues that he set up. But they were Noldor originally, right? And that was an important element, that this was it was a separate Noldor population, which separated from the other Noldor, and then were recombined with others in various ways. So he's changed that, and that might seem, from a plot basis, it might not seem like a big deal to say that the Green Elves are, a subset of the Teleri rather than a subset of the Noldor. But from a linguistic standpoint, that's a huge deal, right? He's made a big change there in doing that. Anyway, so he's still revising in some ways, but he's not going to forget it entirely. And I love little reminders like this. Okay. Byrd Miriel. In that time was born in Eldamar, in the house of the king, in Tirion upon the crown of Tuna, Feanor, the eldest of the sons of Finwë, and the most beloved. Miriel was the name of his mother. Silver was her hair, and dark were her eyes, but her hands were more skilled to fineness than any hands, even of the Noldor. By her was the craft of needles devised, and were but one fragment of the broideries of Miriel to be seen in Middle-earth, it would be held dearer than a king's realm, for the richness of her devices and the fire of their colors were as manifold and as bright as the glory of leaf and flower and wings in the fields of Yavanna. Therefore, she was named Miriel Serenda. Okay, so several things here. First, we'll get back to Miriel, right? I'm still not entirely without hope, though I've digressed so long about some of these other things that maybe maybe we'll not get to what I wanted to talk about in phase 2. But anyway, we'll have a lot more to say about Muriel in phase 2. I can't even. But notice, right? Notice that, notice how much time he's taking here. Here's my data point number 2, if the other ones count as 1. Here's my data point number 2 about Tolkien pausing and investing a significant amount of sub-creative energy here in developing one of his female characters, right? Feanor's mom was important because she was Feanor's mom, right? But this is new. This is a big deal, right? She doesn't just do embroidery, she invented embroidery, right? Her hands were more skilled to fineness than any hands even of the Noldor. Because remember the significance of that sentence. Because the Noldor were more skilled to fineness than Aule, right? The Valar themselves came in second to the Noldor. Remember that was in one of the paragraphs back in, I think, the Annals, maybe? Either the Annals or the Quenta earlier on, right? And she is the greatest of them, right? That's amazing, right? So she is being given. This is saying, and she was the best embroiderer ever, might sound like a pretty wussy attempt to like break gender stereotypes, right? But in context, this is a huge deal, right? Like if it's yes, this is a big deal. So that's, if we're but one fragment of the broideries of Muriel to be seen in Middle-earth, it would be held dearer than a king's realm. My goodness, right? This is a big deal. Okay. I would point out silver was her hair and dark were her eyes is a big deal. You know, what's Fingolfin's eye color? We don't know. We've never been told, right? We've never been told anything about that. In other words, we see him pausing to imagine her in a new way here. Even the fact that she is being given not only the name Miriel Serinda, but Burda Miriel. That is the name Serinda translated into Anglo-Saxon, right? Alfwina is clearly impressed by Muriel as well, right? So again, even kind of within the context of the frame, Muriel is having emphasis laid upon her, right? Like we don't get Anglo-Saxon translations of the titles of most of the rest of the characters. Very few of the boys have Anglo-Saxon translations of their names, right? But Muriel gets one. So again, it's another little interesting point. Now, like I said, we'll have much more to say about Muriel later on, but not quite yet. Let's keep going. All right. More on Feanor. And Feanor grew swiftly, as if a secret fire were kindled within him, and he was tall and fair of face and masterful, and he became of all the Noldor the most subtle of heart and of mind, and the most skilled of hand. He it was that in his youth, bettering the work of Rumil, made those letters which bear his name, and which ever since the Eldar have used. Yet this was the least of his works, for he it was that first of the Noldor discovered how gems greater and brighter than those of the earth might be made with skill. And the first gems that Feanor devised were white and colourless, but being set under starlight, they would blaze with blue and white fires brighter than Helluin. And other crystals he made, wherein things far away could be seen small but clear, as with the eyes of the eagles of Manwë. Seldom were the hand and mind of Feanor at rest. Okay. So first, of course, we see, the prodigality with which the superlatives are bestowed upon Feanor. But remember the gem business, gems were important earlier on, and you remember that, right? That in the older versions of the story, even up through 1937, not just back in the Book of Lost Tales, but back in the 1937 Quenta, the Noldor invented gems, right? Gems were manufactured, right? Gems were manufactured, and it was the Noldor who invented them. And so the Silmarils were the greatest of these very characteristically Noldoran inventions, which were gems. But of course, you will then remember, and Christopher drew attention to it, that in this later version, in the Annals of Aman, and I believe again in the Quenta revision, Tolkien has the Noldor mining the gems. They were the first ones to like discover and cut gems. They didn't make them, right? So notice for a second here in the now this it was all we always knew the Silmarils were coming anyway, even after they were mining them. But notice the place that this gives to so. The first point that I will make, and I won't make a huge big deal of it, but I think it's an interesting thing, is that yes, it's true that, as we observed before, the changing of the Noldor from inventors of gems to miners of gems is seems to fit within the context of Tolkien making the mythology work more within the consistent world, right? Doing less of the mythology of origin and more of the, like, that is, gems are elf stones made by elves, right? Remnants of elvish stuff, right? Less of that kind of myth, which doesn't really hold together even with the other stories in the old Silmarillion necessarily. And because there are lots of gems that aren't invented by Noldor, like the dwarves have gems, which they didn't get from the Noldor, whatever. Anyway, okay. So in that way, the story is holding together better and it works better. But also notice there is a secondary consequence of that change. And that is the even increasing elevation of the Silmarils and of Feanor, right? No, the Noldor don't invent gems, but Feanor kind of does, right? Feanor does invent gems. So he has not... The Noldor invented gems. If they got into his drawer, right, into his cut material drawer, they didn't stay there very long, right? Not just because the Silmarils were never going in the drawer, but because he's still setting up the Silmarils with these other gems that Feanor created, right? So the effect is not to remove, the result, I should say, is not to remove invented gems entirely from his mythology, but instead to make them almost, in a sense, one of Feanor's inventions, right? Yeah. So yes. So that's one interesting point. But yes, in response to the comments that several of you are making, and I'm sorry, I should have commented on this first before I started talking about gem invention. Other crystals he made wherein things far away could be seen small but clear as with the eyes of the eagles of Manwë. Does that sound familiar? Yes, it should. This, I do believe, is Tolkien retconning the Palantiri for the first time. This is the Palantiri's first appearance in the Silmarillion tradition. Yes, absolutely. And James, thank you for quoting that, because I was thinking of that exact same thing as well. I believe that not only is he retconning the Palantiri into the Silmarillion tradition, he is almost, this is like a slant quotation of the Lord of the Rings. Seldom were the hand and mind of Feanor at rest. James and I were both recalling Gandalf's reference to when Gandalf is explaining to Pippin about the Palantiri, right? And Gandalf speculating there with on, Shadowfax's back, right? With Pippin, speculating that Feanor himself wrought them in the deeps of time, perhaps, right? Gandalf refers to the unimaginable hand and mind of Feanor at their work, right? So seldom were the hand and mind of Feanor at rest. Yes, yeah, I that is an almost quotation of Gandalf's line there, right? So when he's explaining the Palantiri, Gandalf is explaining the Palantiri and speculating that Feanor made them. So is Tolkien thinking about the Palantiri here? I'm going with yes, definitely, right? Because again, it's almost a quotation. So, Zach, were the Palantiri always suggested to be Feanorian from the beginning in The Lord of the Rings? No, they weren't. They were Númenorian. But then the question about like where the Númenorians got them, I don't remember exactly, Zach, when that line from Gandalf, the Feanorian attribution, when exactly it enters in to the drafts, whether that was very early or very late. But the Seeing Stone, they were primarily the Seeing Stones of Gondor, born from across the sea. They were like Númenorian relics, right? That they get connected back to, again, I don't remember at what point, but it's there, right? It's in the Lord of the Rings text. So whether it was early or late in his process about them, but I don't remember for sure, but I'm guessing late. If I had to make a bet, I would bet on late in the development. Might be wrong, but that's what I would bet on. But anyway, here he is. Here, this is now influencing his thoughts. So the idea of Feanor now, we not only have the Silmarils, we have the Palantiri, and therefore Feanor as preeminent inventor, right? He didn't invent gems entirely, but he improved them, right? He invented better gems, and of course, ultimately, the Palantiri as well, and obviously, ultimately, the Silmarils. Okay. It is told also that at this time Melkor would speak to the Eldar of weapons and armor, and of the power that they gave to him that is armed to defend his own, as he said. The Eldar had before possessed no weapons, and since the chaining of Melkor the armories of the gods had been shut. But the Noldor now learned the fashioning of swords of tempered steel, and the making of bows and of arrows and of spears, and they made shields in those days, and emblazoned them with devices of silver and gold and gems. Thus it was that the Noldor were armed in the days of their flight. Thus, too, as oft was seen, the evil of Melkor was turned against him, for the swords of the gnomes did him more hurt than anything under the gods upon this earth. Yet they had little joy of Melkor's teaching, for all the sorrows of the gnomes they wrought with their own swords, as later shall be seen, quoth Pengalod. Okay, so we get Pengalod's little attribution there at the end. Okay, so a couple issues here. Yeah, that image, Nancy, of the armories of the gods is very striking, right? Yes, there's a stockpile of weapons held under lock and key, and the elves never see them, right? The elves don't even know that there's a secret armory of the Valar. They went to war before, so they've got weapons, right? But they've locked them away, right? In like the gun safe of the Valar, so that the kids don't get access to the weapons and aren't influenced by that. But they exist, right? Francis, yeah, some of the weapons of the Valar are alluded to, at least indirectly. Orome, right, is a hunter, and most people don't hunt with their bare hands, right? This, of course, leads... Tulkas does, Nancy, but even the fact that Tulkas, it's emphasized that Tulkas fights with his bare hands suggests that there's, that it's odd, right? So yeah. One thing I don't get here, the making of bows and of arrows and of spears. What did Celegorm hunt with before this? Right? Arthel, excuse me, Isfin, Iriel was hunting with the sons of Feanor, who were hunting with Orome, right? How? What did they do? throwing rocks, maybe. Slings? I don't know. Embroidery needles. Yeah, I don't really get it. See, no, I reject the idea that they were all hunting with their bare hands. Because again, if everyone does things Tulkas style, then Tulkas is merely like the lead. No, they were riding horses, and they were, I think, using weapons. Lightsabers, says John. Back in the old days. Yes, exactly. Matt suggests particularly harsh language. Right, yes, exactly. They were deploying their linguistic skills aggressively and offensively against the beasts of the field. Well, they do have hounds, Stephen. We know they have hounds. So it's, of course, theoretically possible that the hunting that Kelogorm and Isfin are doing is nothing other than running after the hounds who do the killing themselves. That is conceivable, that's what's happening. That's about the only weaponless hunting version I can think of. But I don't know. I'm sorry. Orome has weapons, and I can't imagine that Orome goes out hunting without weapons. I don't see that. Now, I think that Tolkien is going to shift from this and make a bigger deal of the. He's already making a big deal of the swords, right? But I think even a more. He's going to shift away from the idea that this slightly short-sighted idea that they didn't have bows or arrows or spears. But anyway. But here's the main point. I love that later sentence about thus too, as oft was seen, the evil of Melkor was turned against him, right? How the way in which the weapons making at Melkor's instigation, right, the weapons making of the Noldor is the source of their own sorrow, right? And the is at the root of their own tragedy, and yet also did Morgoth no favors either, right? I really love that sentence. It is possible, Stephen, that they had bows and spears of a sort before, but these are different in some way, right? Because, I mean, goodness knows there is a difference between a hunting spear and a spear that you would use in war, either like a lance that you would use from horseback or a pike that you would use as a foot soldier, right? Neither one of those weapons is exactly the same as a weapon that you use to hunt, nor are the war bows going to be very, closely akin to the bows that they would likely have been used to hunt. So it is possible, Stephen, that we could kind of take it in that direction to say that just as they learned the fashioning of swords of tempered steel, so the making of bows and of arrows and of spears also in the kind of the tempered steel sort of variety are what we're talking about. Yeah. Arthur, I'm not sure that there was a hunter named Tinfang Warbow, but there should be. There really should be. Yeah. You're so very right about that. Okay. Of these lies, quarrels were born among the proud children of Finwë, and of these quarrels came the end of the high days in Valinor. There's quarrels between Fingolfin and Feanor, and the evening of its ancient glory. For Feanor spake words of rebellion against the Valar, crying aloud that he would depart from Valinor back to the world without, and deliver, as he said, the gnomes from thraldom if they would follow him. And when Fingolfin sought to restrain him, Feanor drew his sword upon him, for the lies of Melkor, though he knew not clearly their source, had taken root in the pride of his heart. This shift, this development of the story of the drawing of weapons, Feanor drawing his sword on Fingolfin, this is an important moment. But Yeah, Stephen, I was thinking that Tinfang Warbow sounds like a really good Lotro character name. Absolutely. Um, but anyway, okay. But the fact that he has shifted the rebellion of Feanor to this moment, right? He's taking the things that Feanor used to say in the past and will again in the future say only at the speech by torchlight, right? Only after the destruction and the actual departure of the Noldor. He has Feanor kind of you know, totally blowing his top here, with a rebellion towards the Valar much earlier on, right? The thing that's most interesting to me about that is he is the elevation of this moment, right? He is taking the rebellion of Feanor against the Valar and shifting it backwards from the time after the death of Finwë and after the destruction of the trees, all the way back to making it coincide with and sort of exacerbate the drawing of the sword on Fingolfin, right? This would seem to be like the effect of this is to make the unrest of the Noldor and the rebellion of Feanor more closely tied to ultimately the kinslaying and the doom of Mandos, right? Tied to that more closely from the beginning. And it's an interesting move. I think it's interesting the way that we see those two ideas being tied together here. Not sure in the end I'm a big fan of this shift, and apparently Tolkien wasn't either because he changes it back after this. But I do think that that's interesting. Okay, and then more on the Orcor. I try not to take too long on this, but it's a reference, so we needed to talk about it. He brought into being the race of the Orcor, and they grew and multiplied in the bowels of the earth. These creatures Morgoth made in envy and mockery of the elves. Therefore in form they were like unto the children of Ilúvatar, yet foul to look upon, for they were made in hatred, and with hatred they were filled. Their voices were as the clashing of stones, and they laughed not, save only at torment and cruel deeds. Glamhoth, the hosts of tumult, the Noldor called them. Notice how that paragraph is entirely consistent with manufactured orcs, right? Footnote to the Orcor. He brought into being the race of the Orcor. Footnote. In Gnomish speech, this name is Orch, O-R-C-H, of one, Irch, of many. Orcs, we may name them, we Anglo-Saxons, right? For in the ancient days they were strong and fell as demons, yet they were of other kind, a spawn of earth, corrupted by the power of Morgoth, and they could be slain or destroyed by the valiant, quoth Alfwine. Okay, this looks like backward movement, right? Not only is both the footnote, and now remember that the last time we saw this passage in the Annals, I think it was in the Annals. Yeah, it's hard to keep track. But anyway, the last time we saw this passage, he did like a partly thing, right? The body of the text was consistent with manufactured orcs, but the note, the quoth Alfwine, the quoth Pengaloth, quoth Alfwine note, was explicitly stating the teaching of the wise that evil cannot create, right? And so that they must have been corrupted instead. He's gone, it would seem, backwards from that here. This whole passage is consistent with manufactured orcs, both the note and the main text. He says they're like unto the children of Ilúvatar. He calls them spawn of earth, corrupted by the power of Morgoth. But spawn of earth? Where else has he called the elves the spawn of earth? Right? That's not a very elvish kind of thing, right? So that does not sound to me like, I mean, Christopher, in his notes, seemed to be holding open the possibility that spawn of earth corrupted by the power of Morgoth meant that they were elves, or, you know, was evidence that that Tolkien was still thinking in that way in this passage. But to me, that seems pretty weak, honestly.
if he were to say that, he's said that much more overtly before. To call them instead this seems like, if anything, a kind of a halfway position, right? He's opening up the possibility. Is this possibly the whole spawn of earth corrupted by the power of Morgoth? Does that suggest that he's trying to think of a middle ground between the elf position, the corrupted elf position, and the orcs from scratch, the orcs as constructs position? Is he trying to imagine an intermediary case in which they've not been constructed from scratch? So the doctrinal position about evil not creating he can still make his peace with St. Augustine, and yet have them not be elves, and thus avoid the free will problem, and the do they go to Mandos when they die problem, and all those other issues, right? And you're right, Arthur. Not only is it not a thing we've ever heard about elves, that is them called spawn of earth, but it is hard to imagine an elf saying that, or even Alfwina for that matter, right? Again, Arthur, and that's the only defense I could see, is that this is a quoth Alfwina passage, right? So Alfwina is explicitly talking about translating into Anglo-Saxon concepts here with the orc demon thing, right? So could he, that is Alfwina, be using spawn of earth, not because that's an elvish phrase, even though so he's talking about elves, but he's talking about them in a different way, because he's putting it in terms that his Anglo-Saxon audience would understand, right? So thinking of, I mean, you could almost go in a Genesis 6 kind of direction here, right? The sons of God and the daughters of men sort of thing, right? Saying like spawn of earth in the sense of meaning, incarnate races rather than divine beings, right? Or something, right? I don't know. So again, maybe in some sense he's appealing to not to elvish categories, but to Anglo-Saxon categories. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Yana, conceivably, of course, you could imagine that spawn of earth, they could potentially be corrupted dwarves who are connected with stone, at least, if not earth. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, this passage does not seem to me to suggest that Tolkien has a very clear idea at all, right, about what he's imagining here, right? But kind of opening the door vaguely to some other solution, right? Could they be animals corrupted? That could avoid the free will problem? Yeah. Anyway, okay, we're just about out of time, but I'm also out of phase 1. So let me at least glance into phase 2, which is what I was really looking forward to getting to tonight. And so here I am being pokey as usual. But, okay. Here's a quick note at the beginning of phase 2. I'll let you go soon. Just a touch of phase 2. Indulge me. Thinking about the organization of the text as he revisits the Quenta Silmarillion here in the late 50s now. It's years, but now the Lord of the Rings has been published and out, right? He's been revising stuff about the Lord of the Rings for a while, but now he's coming back to the Silmarillion. It's time to it's time again to start getting the Silmarillion prepped for publication, right? So he's going back to the Quenta. Notice, by the way, he's going back to the Quenta. We haven't seen him going back to the Annals yet in exactly the same way, so that's interesting. But he's taken chapter 1 of the Old Quenta, and he's turned it into a separate thing called the Vala Quenta, right? Which is set aside like the Ainulindale. So we've got the Ainulindale as a freestanding thing. We have the Vala Quenta as a freestanding thing, and the Quenta Silmarillion, which follows it. So the structure of the published Silmarillion is emerging, what we're familiar with, Christopher's published Silmarillion, not Tolkien's theoretical published Silmarillion, is emerging here, right? Christopher throws this off at the beginning, But there was a very interesting thing that I noticed here, and I think you will be able to guess the thing that I was most focused on here. Vala Quenta 1 is headed like the preceding versions. Quenta Silmarillion. Here begins the Silmarillion, or the history of the Silmarils, part 1 of the Valar. Vala Quenta 2, on the other hand, is headed Vala Quenta. So the decision to change Chapter 1 into the freestanding Vala Quenta happens in the second version, the second typescript of the Vala Quenta. Here is the account of the Valar and the Maiar according to the lore of the Eldar. That the original first chapter of the Silmarillion had become a separate entity, like the Ainulindalë, is shown, apart from the new title, by the fact that to the final text of the next chapter of Valinor and the Two Trees, a title page, together with a page carrying the preamble, Alfwina's note, and the translator's note, was attached, and the chapter numbered 1. Okay. Yes, I am interested in how the book was organized and his new conception of how the book was to be organized. That's kind of interesting. But of course, can you guess what I was most interested in here? In this late 50s version, as he is here in the Vala Quenta 2 typescript, which is sort of a final text for this version, what do we see? The frame still exists, right? Tolkien is still leaning on the frame. We talked before about how the frame still kind of creates problems, right? It's going to be hard to do the frame in the published Silmarillion because we don't any longer have the frame tale of Ariel like we did back in the Book of Lot. So who is this Alfwina dude? Who is this Pengaloth dude? Who, how does this all, under what circumstances is this text being transmitted to us? Is Bilbo involved, right? All of those questions are still unresolved, but Tolkien doesn't appear to care that they're still unresolved, right? All of that frame stuff is still present. Tolkien has not taken the step to remove the frame elements at all. Very interesting to me. Now, it is very clear, and Christopher makes it explicit, that this second text of the Vala Quenta is the text that the published Silmarillion is based on, right? And this is where we start getting into confessional mode, and Christopher going through and pulling the curtain back and telling us all the decisions that the editorial decisions he made in the late 70s between his father's death and the publication of the Silmarillion, and him giving us stuff that he cut from the original text, like all of that those cutting room floor phrases and sentences. Oh, pitter pat my heart. I loved this section. This was great. And I was fascinated by Christopher's kind of confessional tone, right? It's very cool. This is now, and I'm forgetting. My copy of the text is not in arm's reach. What was the publication date of Morgoth's Ring? When did it come out? I don't remember. 90s, right? Mid-90s? Thank you. 93. Appreciate that, James. 1993. So it's 20 years now since he started the project, essentially. 20 years after his father's death, he's publishing this, right? So it's been a while, right? And he's now looking back and now, having spent the last 20 years immersed in his father's manuscripts, he now knows the situation much better. He clearly would do things differently if he were, editing the Silmarillion in 1993 compared to when he did it in the mid 70s. But I agree, Lynn. It was. I found it delightful. The kind of humility that Christopher Tolkien shows in this entire section was remarkable, I think. Showing how he wanted to be true to his father's vision, and that he admits stuff that he hadn't, that he wishes he hadn't cut some stuff, right? Loved that. We'll look at some examples. We won't look at all of my examples because I'm out of time. But let's just do one. Let's just do one and I'll let you go. The history of the phrase, "with Manwë dwells Varda," the Silmarillion, page 26, is curious. That seems like an innocuous phrase, right? About Manwë and Varda's cohabitation. The Quenta Silmarillion, that is the old Quenta, 1937 Quenta, has "with him dwells as wife Varda." By emendation to the later Quenta, so when he comes back to this in the early 50s, it became with him in Arda dwells as spouse Varda. Okay, so they cohabitate, but only here in Arda, right? And in the Valaquenta, it is with Manwë now dwells as spouse Varda. In 1975, when the main work on the text of the published Silmarillion was done, being then much clearer than I have since become about certain dates and textual relations, and ignorant of the existence of some texts, I did not see that this now could have any significance. And moreover, it contributed to the problem of tense in the Valaquenta, which is discussed below. I therefore omitted it. So the text says, with Manwë now dwells as spouse Varda. So here, mid-70s, Christopher is looking at this saying, why now? With Manwë now dwells as spouse Varda. Like that it seems a little weird, right? Like, did they just, Manwë and Varda just shacked up, right? That just happened? Like, it seems a little odd, right? So he's like, okay, but it probably doesn't mean anything. And he's like, no, now I see it does mean something, right? It is, however, undoubtedly significant. In the Annals of Aman, it is said Varda was Manwë's spouse from the beginning, in contrast to the later union of Yavanna and Aule in Ea. But the typescript text of the Annals of Aman was amended to Varda was Manwë's spouse from the beginning of Arda, which shows that some complex conception was present, though never definitively expressed, concerning the time of the union of the great spirits. So, in fact, the presence of the word now in the text which Christopher Tolkien cut, right, gives us some information on one of those threads that we've been looking at, one of those things that I've been interested in looking at, which is his conception of the Valar and their relationship to the earth, right? The Valar's bodies, and what we've been looking at with the children of the Valar, for instance, right, is the kind of biggest, most flagrant example of how this concept of the relationship between the Valar and and Arda is progressing, right? So he had originally said, remember we had been looking in the early Quenta at how he was crossing out wife all over the place and putting spouse instead. And that he explained that he was doing this because he was only using the word spouse metaphorically. Like, they're not literally husband and wife. At the same time that he's deciding that they don't literally have children, right? So he was distancing the Valar from physical presence in the world, right? They're not incarnate in the world. They don't have babies, and they're not literally husband and wife, right? But they are matched with each other. They do form these like very significant partnerships, right? Which are kind of understood sort of metaphorically, right, as marriages. Notice the extra element that is emphasized here with his use of the word now, right? Manwë and Varda were not partners from the beginning. They did not emerge from the mind of Iluvatar as partners. They have not been bound together. Manwë and Varda did not start dating in the timeless halls, right? That's not how this happened. Their relationship is not primordial. It begins with Ea. It begins with when they become Valar, when they descend into Ea. That's when Manwë and Varda come. So Manwë and Varda are like founding partners, right? Their partnership is old, but it does not extend past. And that tells us something about how he is changing the concept of the Valar, right? And that, I think, is interesting, right? And shows us some things about how his concept of the Valar are changing. This is as much as to say, although I was like a little bit interested in, the very small fine changes that are going from draft to draft, I am finding every single confession that Christopher Tolkien makes about editorial changes that he made to the text off his own bat, right? The stuff that he himself added, that he admits that he added, or that he admits that he cut and maybe shouldn't have. Every single one of those I found must read passages, right? So we're going to talk about a bunch of these because I was completely enamored. And then, oh my goodness, we didn't get to it tonight. Next week, the business about the divorce. Holy cow, Finwë and Muriel. I was in stitches. I was literally rocking back and forth, cracking up, rereading the early stuff about the development of the Finwë and Muriel. Holy cow. So next week, join me next week for more absolutely gripping, text editorial decisions by Christopher Tolkien, because this is hot stuff. And of course, we will get in from there into this entire world building moment, right? That Tolkien begins to indulge in as he's revising. So we're gonna do so. I hope to get into the blanking on the wording of the phrase, the manners and culture of the Eldar. I'm forgetting the name of it. But yeah, Michelle says tune in next week for Real Housewives of Valinor. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, exactly. But anyhow, yeah, so we'll do that stuff next week. We'll start off with the editorial stuff, and then we'll do the story of the sordid history of Firiel. Sorry, not Firiel. She's good. Of Muriel and Finwë. We will, and then we'll move on into the laws and customs of the Eldar. Thank you, Marie. That's just the phrase I was blanking on there. The laws and customs of the Eldar. All right. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys next week. Good night now.
The Mythgard Academy has been offering in-depth discussions of awesome books and films since 2013, completely free to attend and free to download. If you've enjoyed our discussions and would like to help them continue, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.